thank you very much. We've been trying to organize an opportunity for me to speak to Chamber for a while, so I really do appreciate being here, and particularly recognizing the 100th anniversary of Chamber. I think, many of you have heard me speak. I don't like politics, and part of the struggle that you get when you get organizations like Chamber or Rotary or others is that we've lost the ability to distinguish between partisanship and politics, right? And so people get nervous when you've got an opposition member as your representative, and you've got a non-political group, and you're going to have this guy come in, and they're afraid that he's going to just kick the you-know-what out of the government and turn it into a partisan affair. But if you know me well enough, I'm not about partisan politics, I'm about governance and government. And I think we as an organization in town, because I'm a member of the Chamber as well, had businesses in town as well. As an organization, we need to understand more the relationship between politics and good governance, and try and get politicians to move away from the partisanship that we've defaulted to. There's a fundamental problem with our politics that all it is electioneering. Right? It's just electioneering, constantly. And as voters, what we want is governance, and good governance. And we want governance that sort of parks the ego, parks the partisanship until the 28 days of an election, and then you kind of, you can go for it. But what we want is good governance in between that. And I think in particular for small, medium-sized enterprises, home-based businesses, retail outlets, one of the toughest jobs in the world, I've always said, is if you own a restaurant. I don't think there's a whole lot that's tougher than that. What we need is our governments to understand how much of the economy you now capture. Right? 80%, 85% of all new jobs come from small, medium-sized enterprises, not large corporate entities. And as a consequence, we need to have government at both levels, federal and provincial. I would also argue the cities to kind of get their heads around this, is that we still are pretty much driven by kind of the large corporate agenda, the large corporate mindset. Our regulations, for the most part, are wrapped around that. Our tax policy is kind of wrapped around that. And we don't take into consideration what we need to do to adapt to how our economy is really structured, which is SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and the driver that they've become in the economy. And in some of the discussions that I've had with my own colleagues in the NDP, because of course I'm an anomaly in the NDP, I'm ex-corporate, ex-liberal, so they're not quite sure what to do with me on most days. And when I stand up and speak, it's like I'm speaking from another planet sometimes. But one of the things I'm trying to get our own caucus to understand is that we need to come forward to the business community with an agenda that truly speaks to that. A good example are changes in taxation policy. At one point, drop in GST federally may sound like great news on a consumer basis, but for small, medium-sized enterprises that don't have sophisticated point-of-sale systems that they can change with one little input, it's a pain in the butt, right? Especially if a few years later you got to bump it back up again because you kind of did an oops on the revenue side, which is what the dialogue is now, right? GST is going to have to come back up again. You go to oppose HST. It has implications for small, medium-sized enterprises. And that's part of the debate that's going on with HST just now, is that as an export-driven economy, there's a lot of people who will benefit from HST because of the input tax credits. But the basis of our economy is not that export economy anymore. It's an internal economy that actually HST becomes punitive towards. The restaurant businesses, the taxi cab businesses, the tourism businesses that all are the main drivers. So part of what I think the Chamber, both at the BC level and at the local level, needs to try to do in terms of a better job with politicians is to get us to begin to look at regulation, taxation policy, all of that through a stronger lens of small, medium-sized enterprises, home-based businesses, etc. And because of lobbies by the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, the Chambers of Commerce, both Canadian and British Columbia, you're beginning to see some of those changes. And so it's not like it isn't happening. I think it has to accelerate. Some of those changes include the possibility of voluntary EI if you're a small business operator. I can tell you right now that a lot of the logging contractors, silviculture contractors, forestry consultants, the owners of those businesses would have liked that 5 or 6 years ago, because they're getting lost right now as we see this restructuring of the forest sector and don't have anywhere to go. So that's beneficial to begin to look at that as an option. Some kind of, and the BC Liberals, the provincial government, have done this, some kind of pension ability, right, where you can actually voluntarily join a pension plan that's put together by the provincial government and is a buy-in basis. So those kinds of things, I think, are important and reflect where we're at, but we have to advance that. But at the end of the day, small, medium-sized enterprises, the businesses that you have, are dependent upon the BC economy having an engine that's working, right? I mean, if that main engine, forestry, mining, agriculture, tourism, if that main engine, I'm going to talk about education in a second, I haven't forgotten it, if that main engine isn't operating, then you get scenarios like a Mackenzie, like Midway, Campbell River, etc., where you only have so much inertia and activity within the small, medium-sized enterprises before that starts to wind down because the big paychecks are not available, right? And I would suggest to you, I mean, my background's in history and biology, and we can sit and have a beer and I'll explain to you how those two went together at one point. I have a bachelor's degree in both of them, but as somebody who's interested in history, one of the things that I've reflected on in my short time in politics is I think we're in the latter days in BC of the winding down of the W.A.C. Bennett era.